Good. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon about the intrapreneurial mindset. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. Thanks for joining us. First of all, thanks for taking time out of your busy day. I am broadcasting to you from a co-working space in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm joined by my colleagues, Audrey, Wyatt, and Tricia Teague. Audrey is the founder and CEO of Leaders and Lifters, a training and development organization based in Dallas, Texas. So partnering with leaders at all levels and industries, Audrey's focus on improving emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and positive workplace environments. Audrey also maintains a B2B partnership with Simplified Coach in Silicon Valley to deliver several workshops throughout the United States for a Fortune 500 global tech company. Audrey, welcome.
Thank
Tricia.
you.
Tricia Teague is the founder of Trep School, a coaching and consulting firm based in Danville, Illinois. Tricia, in addition to being an Ice House facilitator, she's a co-active coach and author. She has a background in product management, publishing, and project management.
Yes.
So thank you, Tricia and Audrey, also for joining us. I'm going to jump in, share my screen, get the slides, and let's get this party started. So you guys can see my slides, okay? Everyone,
yeah.
Trish?
Yes.
Yep. You guys can see. Okay, perfect. So the formal title of this webinar is Transform Your Organization with an Intrapreneurial Mindset. Of course, we would love it if you would follow us on social media. I'm at G. Schoeniger. You can reach Audrey at Inspire Workers and Tricia at the Trep School. So we will send all of you these slides as a follow-up within 24 hours of the webinar. So if you're trying to keep notes and write everything down, just know that you'll get the slides, all of our slides in a PDF format. So we are the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. Our focus is on entrepreneurial mindset education programs, professional development, keynotes, and workshops for individuals, organizations, and academic institutions worldwide. We are also the creators of the Ice House entrepreneurship programs. Maybe you've heard of that, maybe you haven't. We'll talk a little bit about that maybe later on. So we have four key topics that we want to hit in this session, right? I'm going to start by talking about how to develop an innovator's mindset to increase employee engagement. We're going to talk about how to expose the intersection of individual and organizational needs, how to identify the hidden barriers that hinder innovative and entrepreneurial behavior within an organization, and then Tricia is going to talk about how to unleash human potential through micro-experimentation. So, okay, before we jump into the session, what I'd like you all to do is take a look at, I think on the bottom of your screen, there is a chat function there, right? So it'd be great if all of you could just chime in on the chat, let us know who you are and where you're from, where you are in the world, your organization. That would be great. Let's get the conversation going early and often. There we go. Hey, Ann at Penn State. Awesome. Welcome, Ann. We've also put some questions in the polling. If you'd be kind enough to go in and look at some of the polling questions, if you could participate there, that would be greatly appreciated. And we'll throw up some questions throughout. Okay, here we go. This is, now people are chiming in from all over the place. This is super exciting. So Jess from Workforce Alliance in Hawley, Pennsylvania, Mildred from Arkansas. What just happened to my chat function? Okay, it went away. There's back. Okay, so Camilo, Western Massachusetts. Chris Strage, University of Northern Iowa. Hey, we're going to be in Mason City next week in Iowa doing some training. University of Calgary in Canada. Awesome. UNC Greensboro, Ice House facilitator. Woohoo! Way to go, Bill. Hillary from Austin. Cindy from Madison College. Love those folks at Madison. Pearl in Texas. We got Carrie Ann, Nita Palm from Fresno. I just got back from Southern California. Love California. And Penny from Wichita campus. Okay, great. Lots more folks chiming in here. I'm going to get started. Thank you for chiming in on the chat here. Let me get back to the videos. Okay, now someone's posed a question here. Ed, Jack from the Jack Welch Management Institute. Awesome. Welcome, Ed. All right. So I want to start by talking about workforce engagement. The kind of the fun thing about teaching intrapreneurial thinking in an organization is it's sort of a 2-for-1 special. We not only increase engagement, but we equip people with the skills to build an innovative and entrepreneurial culture within the organization. But I want to kind of start off with this baseline here, right? And I follow Gallup's research on workforce engagement, and it's not all that good. So it looks kind of like this, right? All right, slides are frozen. There it is. Okay. Now I got ahead of me. So according to Gallup, this is a 2018 survey. They've been tracking this for some time now. It hasn't really changed much. It kind of goes up and down. But according to Gallup, about 13% of the US and Canada workforce is actively disengaged, right? So these are people that are spreading hostility. They're working against the organization's goals. We all know what that looks like, right? Then we have 53% are just not engaged. These are people that are essentially phoning it in. I think Gallup describes it as not psychologically committed to the organization's goals. And so what we have left is about 34% are actively engaged. What we tend to see is that, so first of all, let's not lose sight of the fact that, approximately 2/3, 66% of our workforce, this is Canada and North America, which by the way, are the most highly engaged worldwide. 2/3 are not engaged and only 1/3 are actively engaged. I will argue that among those that are actively engaged, there's even a smaller subset there who are hyper engaged, right? And these tend to be the intrapreneurials, what we'll call them, right? And so, we tend to look at the individual and blame the individual for their lack of engagement, and we fail to look at the ways in which the systems we've created inhibit, subtly or not so subtly, inhibit the development of intrapreneurial and innovative attitudes, behaviors, and skills. So, this is nothing new. You don't need me to explain this, but innovative and entrepreneurial thinking is essential, more so now than ever, to creating vibrant, sustainable organizational culture. We also know that entrepreneurial skills, entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills are in huge demand. These are the case that I'm going to make in a minute is that entrepreneurial attitudes and skills are the very same skills that HR CEOs are saying these are what employers demand. These are the so-called soft skills that employers demand. So just to summarize it, there's unlimited global demand for people who can think like an entrepreneur, and I'll talk more about what that is here in just a second. The challenge lies in the fact that our ability to embrace entrepreneurial thinking is limited by the ways we define it, right? And so most people think of entrepreneurship as the domain of the Silicon Valley whiz kid who comes up with some new tech, some new app, and gets funding, and now they're a $1 billion valuation company. Sometimes we think of the entrepreneur as sort of somebody owns a business on Main Street. But while those definitions are certainly true, when we look more broadly, there's the Main Street small business owner. When we look more broadly at what entrepreneurs are actually doing, when we break it down to first principles, it's really best described as the pursuit of opportunity. And I'm going to use this definition from Howard Stevenson at the Harvard Business School, which is probably the most often cited definition of entrepreneurship. And I've sort of simplified it to say that simply entrepreneurship is a process of discovering opportunity. And you don't need to want to start your own business to be innovative and entrepreneurial, right? I mean, we all know people that own their own businesses that are not very innovative and entrepreneurial. And we also know people that are very innovative and entrepreneurial and they don't own the business. So it's really about opportunity discovery, which I would define as sort of we're searching for the intersection between our own interest and abilities and the needs of our fellow human, of other humans. I mean, so I sort of think of that as the entrepreneurial process, as this discovery process. Where are your interests? Where are your abilities? And how can you create value with your interest and ability? That's sort of a simple definition of entrepreneurship. It invites everyone in. Now, what I also want to point out is that opportunity discovery requires opportunity discovery skills. And what you'll see here is these are skills that anyone can learn to develop. They're generally skills that most of us have not been taught. They've been overlooked or ignored in our systems of education. They're skills like empathy, like observation and inquiry, or what I would call problem finding. It's a huge thing that people aren't really talking about, although Clayton Christensen's begun to write extensively about this. Experimentation and adaptation, how to design and conduct experiments with limited resources to test ideas, right? Creativity and critical thinking, effective communication, teamwork, collaboration, effective problem solving, resourcefulness, agility, self-directed learning, and self-regulation. I mean, these are sort of a quick snapshot overview of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. Now, I probably should said this earlier, but what I've been trying to figure out for about the last 25 years is why are entrepreneurs so resilient, so creative, so resourceful? How are they able to recognize opportunities the rest of us overlook, right? How do they do that? What are the attitudes, behaviors, and skills that enable them to do that? I've been researching this for 25 years. I've traveled around the world interviewing hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs. We've distilled our findings into curriculum that we'll talk about a little bit later. I co-wrote a book called Who Owns the Ice House? The 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur. It's really, these skills are really, these are IQ independent, these are resource independent, these are situation independent skills that anyone can learn to develop. I also want to bring forth the idea that these skills require a different mindset. And I want to spend about 3 minutes talking about what I mean by a mindset. So this term, the entrepreneurial mindset, or the intrapreneurial mindset, if you will, is rapidly gaining in popularity. Yet the concept of a mindset is sort of this amorphous concept that a lot of people talk about, but very few really understand what that means. So I'm going to spend a minute or two trying to put a very precise definition or some structure about what I mean by mindset. And I'm going to do that by starting with a very precise definition of culture. And Edgar Schein is, the guy that's written extensively. He's a professor emeritus at MIT. He's written extensively for 40 years about a culture. So I'm going to use his definition for a very simple reason. Culture is a collective mindset, right? So he defines culture as a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore be taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. A little bit clunky, but it's very, very precise. So I took Schein's definition of culture and I modified it to define a mindset, right? It's a pattern of basic assumptions learned by an individual as he or she solved problems of external adaptation and internal integration that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore assumed to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems, right? So I realize that's a little bit clunky and long-winded, but it's very, very precise. The point here is that our mindset resides mostly beneath our conscious awareness, right? We're not fully aware of it. We can't articulate it. These are deeply held unconscious beliefs and values and assumptions. And I made this graphic to sort of illustrate that culture influences the mindset, but our mindset can also shape culture. And so in the sociological terms, these are our agency and structure, right? Our agency is our individual capacity to make our way within the structure, and the structure are the rules and systems in place to organize a society or a company or organization or whatever. So in sociology, the term is reflexivity. So reflexivity refers to the extent to which we are either influenced by culture or we influence the culture around us. And I really wanted to zero in on this point here, that you can't point to one or the other. You can't blame the organizational culture. We still have to take individual responsibility for our own choices and interpretations and attitudes and so forth. But these two things work in tandem with each other. It's the person and the situation. So culture, like a mindset, whether individual or collective, works like the iceberg. And again, this is adapted from Shine. Like what we see on the surface are the visible artifacts and observable behaviors. Beneath the surface are the explicit knowledge, the declarative knowledge, the espoused values. This is what we say we stand for. This is what we know, But what Shine tells us is that what shows up on the surface is more often the result of our deeply held implicit knowledge or procedural knowledge. It's deeply held, taken for granted beliefs and tacit assumptions that aren't consciously known, but yet they really influence the outcomes of the organization. So I know the iceberg is a little bit tried and true. It may be a little bit, a stale of an analogy, but I think it's quite useful here to help understand how a mindset/culture works. All right, so my last slide. In interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs across the world, I just got back from a trip about 3 weeks ago from South Africa. I was interviewing entrepreneurs in Cape Town. They all seem to be operating from this core assumption, and I alluded to a minute ago, that this deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption that it is my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to the people around me, and that by doing so, I can empower myself. I mean, I think that is sort of what I would call the genesis, the core belief, usually unconscious belief or a tacit belief, but that is the belief of the entrepreneurial or the intrapreneurial mindset. So I'd like to pause there and hand it over to my colleague, Audrey Wyatt, who's going to talk about what that looks like inside an organization. Take this concept of individual responsibility, figuring out what is I'm good at, what do I like to do, what am I capable of doing, and how can I create the most value within the organization. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Audrey. I'm going to stop sharing and turn the slides over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Can you see my slides?
Yep.
All right, very good. Here we go. So as we continue our discussion on transforming your workplace with an intrapreneurial mindset, it's super important to reiterate, we're not proposing employees leave to start businesses. What we do propose is that we have to look at the entrepreneurial mindset from two perspectives, the organization as a whole and the individual. It's really difficult to transform an environment without looking at both. So we need both perspectives for the intrapreneurial mindset to be unleashed throughout your organization. Innovation and entrepreneurship are two sides of the same coin. Now, innovation is a strategic term used by leaders of an organization because they see the big picture. However, employees think on a much smaller scale. They're just concerned about the day-to-day operations, what's going on in their world. And so entrepreneurship is a term that resonates with them. So innovation is a desired outcome for most leaders I know. However, they cannot innovate without the people side of the coin. And those are the employees who do the work every day. Again, looking at from an organizational standpoint, leaders know they need to innovate. And we know companies, I bet you can think of a company right now that was at the top of their game. And why don't you go ahead and put that in the chat box? A company that was at the top of their game, and now they're either in decline or extinct. But think of a company and put that in the chat box as I continue. Companies that fail to innovate risk becoming extinct. And the reasons for this are many. They cannot innovate, as I said, without the people side of the coin. And those are the entrepreneurs that are the dreamer doers. So just let's put a definition to this. An entrepreneur is an employee inside of an organization, of course, who performs with that entrepreneurial mindset. And so they are your creative problem solvers and your innovators. And I know this firsthand. So after owning my own business and returning to a corporate environment, I realized that I approached my work differently. I approached the work much like I did my own business. Now, I didn't have the language for it then. I didn't necessarily call myself an entrepreneur, but I looked for gaps and I looked for collaboration and I saw problems as opportunities, all the things that entrepreneurs do as they approach their work. Now, I'd like to introduce you to another way of looking at two perspectives, the employee side and the organizational side, and this is called the X model. So your organization is on a path to success, and it includes the mission of the organization, values, goals, and all of that's wrapped up into a strategy. The employee, though, is on a path to success. It's on a personal path, and it's different for every employee. And that includes working in their strengths, their own personal values, personal goals, and they may have a strategy. The intersection of these two paths is the job. Companies, of course, want maximum contribution from their employees. That's why they pay them to come to work. However, employees are looking for maximum satisfaction on the job. And the sweet spot is where those two meet. But they could be on any range of the spectrum here along the way to get to maximum contribution and maximum satisfaction. Suppose we have an employee that's here. So they're really satisfied to be there, but they're not making a lot of contribution. Well, that could be somebody that just started, but I bet in your organization, even right now, there are a lot of people who are just hanging out, collecting a paycheck, happy to collect that paycheck, but they're not making a contribution. We believe that an entrepreneurial mindset increases engagement and that it can be learned. And so this person can learn that mindset. And maybe you have someone on the other side here where they're just banging it out. They're doing an exceptional job on what you want them to do, but they're not happy. They're not satisfied. And maybe that's because they have ideas. They want to work in their strengths. They want meaningful work. And so we believe that the entrepreneurial mindset can be taught, and these people can reach maximum engagement where great days happen at work every day. But there are cultural roadblocks. Now, why would an employee want to be an intrapreneur versus an entrepreneur? Well, one of the main reasons is resources. The organization has resources, and entrepreneurs are forever worrying about resources. However, there's resistance from the organization. And that's what I want to talk about, 4 cultural roadblocks in this next section. So the first roadblock is just leadership mindset. Fear of failure. Now, we get it. Failure can be costly. Large-scale failure is costly. So leaders then begin to try to control execution risks. And there's a resistance to change. And that's counterproductive because, as we said, leaders want to innovate. And so change goes with innovation. There also could be the arrogance of success. So here was a study done by Insight in 2017. And this study, the question is, how often do new business concepts, products, and ideas at your company get less attention than they should because top management tends to favor the main or legacy business? And the result shows that 81% of top managers surveyed indicate that new ideas get less attention than they should. Now, I don't think this is an intellectual problem. More often, the culprit is the inability to escape from that successful past and the tyranny of the urgent, where the pull of the day-to-day decision-making overshadows the need to change. Bill Gates says it this way: success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose. So leaders and employees must challenge priorities and the status quo, particularly in times of success. Leaders must challenge legacy thinking and legacy mindsets. The second cultural barrier is bureaucracy. So when an idea has to go up through a bureaucratic chain, more often than not, it loses steam as it's pushed up the chain. So that original idea, it becomes watered down as it moves further and further away from the entrepreneur. Execution of the idea is also delayed. So top managers rarely have time to hear all the entrepreneurial ideas that come their way. And so they may ignore the idea or push it back down, which causes more delay. And what if it's an urgent thing that needs to be solved, an urgent problem, and something that needs to be executed now? Well, you've just lost time and the organization is stuck. Cultural barrier number 3 is a siloed innovation. So maybe an organization has innovation and it's only for a certain department. And the entrepreneurs sit outside of that department. So they have, if these little dots represent ideas, maybe a few will trickle into the innovation department, but more often than not, they stay with the entrepreneur or they just fall by the wayside. And then we have cultural barrier number 4, which is what I call sound barriers. This is what happens when an employee has an idea, they go to their manager, and these are the types of things that they hear. We don't do that around here. We don't have time to try that. That's too risky. We've tried that before. Why don't you submit a formal business case for that? You will never get that approved. It's not your job to think about that. Well, when entrepreneurs hear things like this, they either go back and sit down and collect a paycheck, much like the X model and the first person that I showed. Maybe that was a person that tried a new thing and then what got their hand slapped is what I call it and sat back down, or saw other people try to execute an idea and it just didn't happen. Or they keep trying to push against the culture and they get discouraged and they leave. So finally, we're going to look at the effect of these cultural roadblocks. So I think everyone will agree that if you look, and here's the iceberg analogy again, and this was a claimed study by a consultant years ago, but we can all agree that at the bottom of the iceberg, 100% of problems are known to frontline employees. But if you look at the tip of the iceberg, only 4% of problems are known to top managers. So 96% of problems are not known to top managers. If they're not known, they're probably not getting solved. And so we are talking about a culture shift here, where problems are delegated to the lowest level, creating an opportunity for meaningful work. Leaders can create that environment where people take risks and are not afraid to fail. So let's think about the future now. It's time that we reskill the current workforce to unleash potential through learning the entrepreneurial mindset. And we need a symbiotic relationship between the organization and its workers. Employees must be empowered to solve problems to the benefit of both the organization and to the employee. There's personal satisfaction that comes from solving problems. They feel valued. There's meaningful work with a whole lot less cultural resistance. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tricia Teague, And she's going to go into greater detail about the leader's mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset.
And let me make sure that I got my slides up here. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about implementation and execution. And this is from an insider's point of view. I had more than 20 years worth of corporate experience, and I've been in organizations where things stayed the same. We do things we've always done, the way we've always done things. We've had those sound barriers and all those other barriers. I've been in organizations where there were starts and stops with trying to be entrepreneurial. And in one of those organizations, eventually what I saw or experienced from the inside was an absolute wonderful case study of how to actually implement all of these things that we're talking about, where it's not just philosophical information, but we're actually taking this type of mindset and changing the culture of an organization from the inside out. The truth of the matter is that most organizations, the old approach to growth is one of three things: expansion, mergers, acquisitions. At one of my former employers, the one for which this case study occurs, the organization has been around for almost 100 years now. At the time that I started there, which was in the late 90s, things were changing. Technology was changing. You know, we were at the dawn of the information age and at the dawn of the internet, really, in terms of its pervasiveness in our business. And so prior to that, everything that had happened was we're expanding, we're getting new customers by either adding locations or just going after more customers, not necessarily changing anything, just we go from 100 to 150 or 100,000 to 150,000, right? But then there's also mergers and acquisitions. We find somebody else who does something similar to what we do, and then we go out and we acquire that company. And when we acquire that company, sometimes what happens in that acquisition is we don't necessarily acquire that innovative culture of that company. So when you look at what happens with the acquisition, if it's a large company, a large, stable, old era approach to doing business, and you got this new innovative company coming in, that new company is kept separate from the old company. That new company has that new innovative culture, and the old company has the old traditional culture. And many times those two are not brought together. And so there's not very much integration that occurs there because the smaller company, the innovative culture, is actually getting swallowed up. What I saw was that there were two approaches to innovation at those traditional companies. So one is look to competitors. That's the traditional approach, because it's copying what competitors have, it's following the leader, it's repeating what's already out there, and it's really a stagnation of the entire industry. So at the organization that I was at, we often heard from sales reps, especially, well, they have this feature and we don't have that. So in order for me to compete, I need to be able to have that, and then I will be able to close this sale. That's a reactive approach to entrepreneurship, or a reactive approach to growth, because it's not really about growth. It's just about following the leader. As the company changed, what we started doing that actually took us towards innovation was listening to the voice of the customer. Because when you're listening to the voice of the customer, it's a constant stream of innovation. You know that you're meeting the customer's needs, and customers' needs are going to change over time. What our customers needed in the 90s is not the same thing that they needed in the early 2000s, and definitely not the same things that they're needing now. The environment changes, laws change, culture changes. So many changes occur that the customer's needs are always changing, and therefore, if you're being innovative and always listening to your customer, you're always at the forefront of what those customers' needs might be. The result is you end up with a very customer-centric approach to innovation. And all of those problems that those customers have are kind of seeds. Those seeds, when they're planted in the ground, actually grow into ideas. So you have the opportunity to say, the customer is talking, and the customer isn't necessarily telling you, I want this product or I want this service, but the customer is saying, I have this problem. And you as the entrepreneurial employee or intrapreneurial is looking at that and discovering the opportunity that exists there for your company as a result of listening to that customer talking about their problem and knowing what your capabilities are and what you can provide for them. So this is what transformation starts to look like when you go from a traditional mindset and traditional approach to product development or to growth to the new innovative approach. It starts to look like, okay, well, we've got one seed and we're just watering this seed. It's a dry land. But now, once we take this innovative approach, we have a field of ideas available to us, a cornucopia, you might call it, of things that we could possibly do to help our customers and to help them, solve their problems and therefore grow our business. And so what it takes to create this entrepreneurial culture, what I saw, what I experienced, actually occurs in 2 steps. And even though there's a couple of steps, there's breakdowns in those. So the first one is that leadership must establish the vision. I had seen a lot of starts and stops, that some of them tried to happen at the middle management level, and they never really went anywhere because of some of those barriers that Audrey talked about. But when it comes from the top down, then it's clear that we're all going to be on the same page. And so being entrepreneurial isn't just about growth, it's also about changing processes. So organic growth is looking at new products and services, it's looking at our bundles, our add-ons and enhancements, and it's also looking at our strategic partnerships. Like, how can we make money from the things that we're already doing and do them in different ways, or acquire new customers with someone else strategically. But then it's also looking at process improvements, things that might lower your operational costs or your time to market or your cycle or delivery times. And what those process improvements are going to obviously vary by industry and by the individual business. But as you're driving down those costs and you're driving up that revenue, then you end up in a very positive place in your business with positive cash flow, and not like all of those businesses that Audrey had you list that eventually closed. The second step in creating an intrapreneurial culture, it's hard to say that too fast, is that the leadership team needs to establish the infrastructure for implementation. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens in a silo. It's something that happens throughout the organization. It actually has to permeate the organization. So the first part of this step is giving all employees a green light for their entrepreneurial ideas. Because when the employees are told how their roles and their department can contribute, then they know that, okay, I can actually make a difference. Whether I'm the person that's at the counter, or I'm the person that's answering the phone, or I'm the person that's traveling to our, trade events, there are things that I know that I can contribute because I hear these things on a regular basis from our customers. Employees know that all of their ideas are good ideas and that their titles don't matter. So their viewpoint is, I'm empowered now to look for opportunities to solve customers' problems. When you're an entrepreneurial employee, that empowerment is amazing. I've been an entrepreneurial employee in both those environments, one where I'm being slapped down because I'm thinking about things that really weren't in my job or we didn't have time for, versus people are listening to me and taking that information and taking it to heart and saying, you know what?
Trish, can you hear us? I think we lost Tricia. Are you still with us, Audrey?
I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
There she's back. Tricia, we lost you there for a second. I'm going to give her just a second if she comes back. She comes back. Otherwise, I'll just pick up the slides and we'll keep going here, and just give us a second here. Looks like we lost her Wi-Fi connection there. All right, I think what I'm going to do is jump back in here. You guys, let me share my screen. I'm going to jump back in here. Sorry about that. We lost Tricia on the Wi-Fi there. I'm just going to come back and put the slide up. So thank everybody, first of all, for participating, but also want to leave time now for Q&A. I know I feel bad that we kind of lost Tricia there about halfway through her comments there. But I want to leave time now for discussion. If you look at the chat function, like happy to answer whatever questions you might have. Now's the time to ask them. If you want to learn more about how to engage with Eli with the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, we'll send these slides. You can learn more at elimindset.com. So we'll follow up with the slides. So what questions do you have? Happy to wait a minute. She's having a solid presentation. Yes, Dean, I'm hoping she's going to come back here in a second. I think my slides just opened recent. Yeah. So Audrey, I really like the way you put that intersectional model there. That really, I think is important for people to understand, because if you look at what entrepreneurs are doing, they're searching for that intersection. Like, what am I good at? What do I like to do? And how can I create value for other humans? So there's this sort of, you know, what I would call like the locus of responsibility for usefulness, for creating value is on the individuals. They're not assuming that I'm just going to do what they're paying me to do. They're kind of going above and beyond and constantly searching for ways to add value in the organization. So I just wanted to chime in. I love that diagram that you created. I think that's really spot on.
You know, I teach that particular diagram in a career course and in an intrapreneurial environment. And I just wish that I could take it to every organization and say, this is the answer right here. We have to have both, the intersection of both. A lot of times the organization's only thinking from their perspective. And the employee oftentimes is frustrated because they're not being heard or don't have meaningful work or whatever matters to them. And so I love that model as well, and just look forward to taking it to other organizations to explain that and how that's so important.
Got it. So Ann has got a question here. Ann Hogue is asking, we're adding intrapreneurship to our course on entrepreneurial leadership. Awesome. Looking for ideas on course content and examples of learning activities and assessments. So I'll take a crack at that, and Audrey, you jump in if you want to add something here. And I really would highly recommend Clayton Christensen's recent book called Competing Against Luck. He really does a deep dive into understanding not just the functional, but the social and emotional dimension of human needs. Super, super helpful. So in the Ice House program, and I'm not sure if you're Ice House facilitator familiar with Ice House, but we have people work in small teams to identify just everyday ordinary problems or frustrations they encounter in their day-to-day work. In small teams, 2, 3, 4 at the most, and start developing the problem-finding, problem-solving muscle. I mean, it's really a muscle that needs to get developed. You're not going to just do what you're told every day, and then one day you're going to come up with the next big thing. I like to think of it in just that way. It's just start solving the most mundane problems in your area of influence. You know, good ideas are the result of a lot of bad ideas. You know, big ideas are the result of lots of small ideas. So, got it. Okay, we'll be attending St. Louis training. Oh, that's awesome, Ann. I'm really happy to hear that. Looking forward to meeting you at our facilitator training. So I didn't mention this. If you want to learn how to become a certified Ice House Entrepreneurial Mindset Facilitator, our next public training is in June. It's in St. Louis. It's being hosted by Lindenwood University in St. Louis. You can learn more about that on our website. Thank you for that, Ann. So Barrett Warren is saying, writing in from the city of Auburn, Alabama. I've heard of other municipalities using intrapreneurial programs to engage employees, and they use rewards as incentive as well. Here we go. Do you have any experience or examples of organizations' rewards or recognition? So that's a really good question, Barrett. And here's the thing. We talked about this yesterday. We're kind of going over our notes for this. Be very, very careful how you reward people with financial rewards. I mean, the psychological literature is quite clear on this, that actually has a backfiring effect. If you're monetary rewards only work in non-cognitive skills. So if you have a line worker doing a repetitive skill, then use financial rewards. What we know from the literature is that the introduction of financial rewards, of monetary rewards, undermines the ability to develop intrinsic motivation. So I would, there's a lot to talk about there, unpack. I'd be very wary of financial incentives. Now, recognition is important, right? Like recognition among your peers for coming up with ideas and implementing ideas, that's a different story. But be very careful with the financial incentives. Dean Blevins is saying it seems that not only appreciating ideas is important, but also providing some infrastructure so the employee has a means of seeing their idea come to fruition. Yes, Dean, I'll give you the $20 later for saying this. Thank you. That's true on both sides. So I want to finish with what Dean says here. For instance, I've seen managers say it's a good idea to go for it, but not provide a structure of support. Can institutions have a kind of makerspace to allow a person to develop ideas to preliminary support the interest? It's so spot on, and I feel like this is both the organizational level and the individual level. If people understood how simple, stupid ideas evolve into bigger and better ideas over time, more people would be doing this, right? So that's an important part of this. And I think Nick is starting to share my video because I'm ranting and raving here. Thank you, Nick. The really good point, Dean. Like the organization has to put measures in place to help cultivate and recognize the early wins, right? These little small wins, a base hit. I felt the bat hit the ball once. Like we got a little bit of traction. Those little early, often rewards or recognitions need to be in place. And the organization also has to understand, like, lots of people doing small little improvements adds up to culture change. And every once in a while, a big idea is going to come forward. So, Nita Palmore, you started a question and we lost you there. So from there, some of the rewards of those organizations used were small, inexpensive trophies or stickers displayed at the desk. And Barrett, yes, I would go, look into like the basics of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. It's really counterintuitive. Dan Pink wrote about this. He did a TED talk about it. Like, extrinsic rewards actually undermine intrinsic motivation. And to be clear about this, intrinsic motivation is when the task itself is the reward. And that intrinsic motivation is the holy grail. So when you want to ask yourself, Why are entrepreneurs so engaged? Why are they so creative, curious? You know, why are they going above and beyond? Why are they so resourceful and resilient? It has very little to do with the individual's personality traits, and it has everything to do with the nature of the goal they're pursuing, the environment within which they're pursuing it, and their relation to that goal. So that really speaks to the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Most of the world is still operating on antiquated understanding of motivation. The behaviorist, there she's back. Hi, Tricia. So most of the world kind of relies on extrinsic motivation. They think, I pay you, so you just do what I tell you to do. They don't recognize that intrinsic motivation is really the holy grail of motivation. Need, offensive, and information from the speakers. We were presented, what we were presented were problems, but I believe that the organizational structure was missed in the equation. It's a good point, Nita, and maybe Audrey and Tricia, you can speak to that.
The organizational structure. And so, Nita, can you give me just an example of what you mean by that? A little bit more information of what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think what she's saying here is, you know, we talked about the problems. Yeah, I'm not really clear on what the real question is here. I mean, Tricia was getting into that. Tricia, do you want to jump back in with your slides, and maybe that can?
Yeah, where I thought you guys, I didn't realize I lost you until. So when was the last slide you guys saw?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me pull the slides back up and I can share again.
Yeah. Because I think you're speaking to what Nita's asking for here.
There we go. It probably was around here somewhere.
Yeah.
So it really requires having a cross-functional team and, you know, having everyone at the table to have conversations about things and projects, whether it's process or growth oriented. And obviously each organization implements this based on what their needs are. In the organization that I was in, we actually had 2 separate tracks. So one for growth-oriented projects and one for process-oriented projects. But there was representation from multiple levels and multiple functions. So every function was definitely always at the table, having these conversations, and we're aware of what's going on. And then taking that information back out to their areas of the organization once things actually got to the stage where they're being implemented. I think that I chimed in the middle of the question, so I think that might answer the question. So number 3 was assembling cross-functional teams, because then employees know they have the opportunity to mastermind with their colleagues. They see the bigger picture and they see that their contribution matters and they're able to learn from each other. Employees get the opportunity also to really take ideas and really develop them further, you know, depending on the approach that's taken and how this is implemented. Number 4 was setting goals and standards for measurement. So you have to measure both the processes as well as the success rates. And those measurements must be meaningful to your business and to your employees. So it's not just a matter of measuring things for the sake of measuring things, but measuring things that make the most sense. One of the greatest ways in which this was done is we started to actually tie departmental and individual goals to the metrics. And so now I see on my annual review that this is what my goals are and these are what the overall goals are. And so when I see the overall goals and relate them back to my goals, I know exactly what I'm doing throughout the course of my career, my day, my week, what my projects should be and what's most important. It really helps the prioritization. And so then as an employee, I understand how my ideas relate to overall goals and how my time, how my output, production, all of those things, how those impact the targets, and know that I'm contributing to something that's bigger than just myself. Number 5 was really providing meaningful incentives. And this is not about providing monetary incentives to employees, but giving employees incentives that actually will foster their contribution, because it will help employees feel good about what they're doing. And that's the viewpoint. I feel good about the recognition that I get for contributing in the way that I contribute in my job. Your average employees are going to step up to the plate, and your entrepreneurial employees are really going to excel when there's meaningful incentives behind what they do. And then this last one is the regular and thorough communication. So I think this also probably touches Nita's question a little bit as well, because it, again, as I said earlier, it's about permeating through the organization. And so the communication is really key here. We used to have quarterly meetings about the goals and where we were going as an organization. And even frontline employees kind of already knew, or at least had some inkling of the pieces that they touched, because there were regular communications in departmental meetings, and also regular requests from frontline employees about things, you know, that could be changed or might need to be looked at. And so then as an employee, you understand, you know, what the initiatives are and that they're important, because there is that regular communication. You feel good, and this one is really critical, I think. You feel good about the direction that the company is heading, and therefore you feel good about your job and working there, and you feel secure in your job. You know, a lot of times in organizations, there's either apathy or there's rumor mill or all types of things that are happening because employees aren't being communicated with about what's going on and the health of the company. But when you actually have these regular conversations, then employees, they don't have that angst. And when they don't have that angst, then their minds are free to actually come up with ideas. And, you know, some other things in terms of employee viewpoint, I see what this means. Yes.
Let's jump in right there. I want to add a point. I love what you just said. And I've looked at some literature in cognitive psychology that points out that, and this is sort of Anita's last comment here, like the more rule-bound an organization is, the less likely the people in that organization are to have insights.
Yes.
It's that simple. And you know, Anita said in her comment, the stiffer and higher the organization, the chance of the ideas getting lost is high.
Absolutely. I wanted to chime in there too. This is Audrey. I just wanted to chime in and just say and it's not about the number of employees. So I've been in smaller environments that were very hierarchical and just had a bureaucratic environment. And then I've seen larger organizations that are relatively flat, and where management is seeing more of a partnership, a 50-50 partnership with the individual contributors. And yes, in those environments, it's much easier to have that entrepreneurial culture.
Yeah. And I would say that what I experienced was, you know, what started off as hierarchical, but really started to change when you started to have, even though it wasn't flat, when you brought everybody to the table and we're all having conversations at the same time. So if you got your tech people, your training people, your executive management team, everybody that has some sort of touch point in the process, understands what's going on, they can provide insights that, you know, are critical, and they can provide them early as opposed to waiting until something gets to the point where it's almost done and almost implemented, and then you go, oh, nobody ever thought of this. So it is this mind meld, so to speak, where, you know, when you have that flat organization, it's a partnership, and we're doing this dance together as a team.
Yeah.
So if you'll allow me to butt in just for another second here, Tricia, I like what you're saying, and you know, I talk about culture or mindset as sort of these deeply held assumptions at the base of the iceberg that we're not consciously aware of. I think one of those assumptions is that the frontline worker is not capable of good ideas.
Right.
Very often, not always, but very often, like the frontline worker is just the worker, and it's only the top leaders that can come up with good ideas. And that's really what the work of the entrepreneurial learning is about, is, you know, sort of exposing this, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're asked to contribute, when their voice is acknowledged, when their contributions are heard. It's got to be done in a structured way. It's not anarchy. It's not like, hey, do whatever you want. You know, here's a budget, here's a checkbook. It's not that. But, you know, what I've seen through my research in 20 years is it's extraordinary what ordinary people can do.
Absolutely. I mean, and sometimes it's just simple things that'll change processes and save time. You know, if you have a frontline employee who does the same thing, let's say he's driving a forklift, and it's like, okay, well, I got to drive across the front of the building to take this thing, pick it up and put it over there. Wouldn't it be easier if we just made these two things closer, because we're always doing this? You know, it's as simple as that, but how much time does it actually save? And the frontline employee is going to look at that situation and go, you know, I'm doing this and this doesn't make sense. And here's where the entrepreneurial mindset comes into play. Do I say something about it or not? Because if I'm being entrepreneurial, then you go, I'm part of the solution. I'm not part of the problem. I see a problem and I want to be part of the solution. So I should bring this up to somebody, because maybe we can get this fixed. And if we get this fixed, then maybe, you know, I increase my output by 10%. They're maybe not be thinking about output by 10%. The manager's thinking that, but the employee is thinking, okay, well, it just makes more sense to me.
So I want to jump in here again, Tricia, and say, like, that's what our training does, is teaches people like how to identify and evaluate and bring an idea forward in a very disciplined way. Because just going to your boss with an idea, with an unvetted, you know, half-baked idea, and then saying, well, I gave my boss an idea and she didn't listen, so I'm going to take my toys and go home. Like, that's not fair. Like, that's not how it works. And what we're teaching in our workshops and with the Ice House program is a very disciplined way to identify the opportunity, and through micro experimentation to test the idea without saying, hey, I have an idea, I need a budget for that. Like, that's not how entrepreneurship works.
Right.
So I just wanted to put a little bit finer point on what you're saying, Tricia. What the work that you and I and Audrey are doing is teaching people how to do that process, the specifics of how to identify the opportunity, how to evaluate it, and then how to bring it to life.
Right. And actually, this is my last slide, so I was about to turn it back over to you anyway, so you can go ahead and take over if you want.
All right, so thank you for that, Tricia, and thank you for letting me, we knew you were going to come back in here sooner or later. Yeah. So Nita is saying company culture to entrepreneurship is inherent, intrinsic within. Thanks. Thank you, Anita. So any further questions, comments, suggestions you have, we're always open to feedback. I hope you have all gotten some value out of this webinar. I'm going to put this last slide up here. Make sure I'm sharing my slides. So just final reminder, if you want to learn more about the work we're doing, you can visit us at elimindset.com. We're the creators of the Ice House program. If you want to learn how to become a certified Ice House facilitator, if you want to learn, you can use our training just for professional development. You can come to our next public training. We do on-site workshops, keynotes, professional development programs for individuals, organizations around the world. I just got back from a week-long training and speaking tour in Cape Town and Johannesburg in South Africa. That's what we do. You can reach Audrey at leadersandlifters.com. You can reach Tricia at thetrepschool.com. We will send these slides I think we have some more comments in the chat thing here. Dean is saying value added if you were serious about the $20. Okay, good. Dean's calling me out on my BS here. Thank you, Dean. Okay, William Johnson is saying, as an entrepreneur, I had to create a pilot project to start gather data, then get by in increasing numbers and success. That's it, William. That's exactly what we're talking about. There's got to be some structure around it. It's just not, willy-nilly. I'll talk briefly here about some work we're doing with the city government in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They're in the process of putting 6,000 city government workers through our entrepreneurial mindset program. If you want to learn more about, you can look at some videos they created called mindsetmemo.com. Tom Darling is an Ice House facilitator. He was hired by the city to then teach the Ice House program to all 6,000 city government workers. What's happening in that organization as a result is nothing short of miraculous. It really validates my core assumptions that not everyone wants to start a business, but everyone wants to be engaged in their work. They want to contribute. They want to have a voice. They want to see their work benefiting others and themselves. That's just a great example of an intrapreneurial mindset. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We'll follow up with the slides, with my slides, with Audrey's slides, and with Tricia's slides. I want to thank Audrey and Tricia for taking time out of your days to participate in this webinar. I hope you all found this useful. Send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And once again, thank you.